Have you ever walked past someone sleeping in a doorway on a freezing night and wondered how they made it through until morning? Not just physically, but how they knew where to sleep, when to move, who to trust, and who to avoid. There's a code on the streets of America that nobody writes down, nobody teaches in any classroom, and nobody talks about on the evening news. It is learned the hard way, passed between people who have nothing left except the knowledge that keeps them breathing for one more night. In 2024, over 770,000 Americans experienced homelessness on any given night. Their average life expectancy hovers around 50 years, nearly 2 decades shorter than housed Americans. Violence, hypothermia, theft, and illness stalk them constantly, but those who survive, the ones who make it through year after year on concrete and cardboard, follow a set of unwritten rules that function like a survival manual. Nobody ever printed. Today, we are exploring 10 unwritten rules homeless people follow to stay alive. And by the end, you will never look at a park bench, a steam grate, or a quiet doorway the same way again. Let's start with never touch another person's belongings. This is the first rule and the most sacred. On the streets, everything a person owns fits inside a single backpack, a shopping cart, or a plastic bag tucked beneath their sleeping body. That bag might contain the only dry pair of socks they have, a photograph of a child they haven't seen in years, medication that keeps a heart condition from killing them, or the last $20 standing between them and starvation. Touching someone's belongings, even to move them slightly, even with good intentions, is treated as an act of aggression that can escalate to violence in seconds. People who have lost everything else guard what remains with a ferocity that the housed world cannot fully understand. Veterans of the streets know to keep their possessions physically attached to their bodies at all times, threading arms through backpack straps while sleeping, tucking phones and wallets deep into inner clothing layers where hands cannot reach without waking them. Some use zip ties to secure bags to their wrists or belt loops, creating alarms made of resistance that interrupt any attempt to pull something free. The sanctity of belongings is the foundation upon which every other street rule is built, because when you own almost nothing, what you do have becomes everything. Never take someone's spot. Territory on the streets is claimed through presence and consistency, not through force or formal agreement. A doorway that someone has slept in for 3 months belongs to that person in the eyes of the street community, even though no lease exists and no landlord collects rent. The same applies to panhandling corners, bench locations, and camp areas beneath overpasses where the concrete stays dry during rain. Newcomers who arrive and set up in an occupied spot without asking are violating a boundary as real and enforceable as any property line. The consequences range from verbal warnings to physical confrontation, depending on the temperament of the person whose territory has been invaded. Experienced street residents learn to read the signs of occupation quickly. A flattened cardboard pad, a blanket folded and tucked behind a dumpster, a particular arrangement of bags in a corner. These are all markers that say someone lives here and will return. Respecting the spot means respecting the one small piece of the world that person has managed to carve out for themselves, and violating it threatens the fragile stability that keeps them functional. Always sleep with one eye open. This phrase is spoken so frequently among homeless communities that it has become almost a proverb, but the reality behind it is deadly serious. Falling into deep sleep on the streets means becoming vulnerable to theft, assault, exposure, and police encounters that can result in arrest or confiscation of everything you own. Experienced street survivors develop the ability to rest in shallow cycles, waking at unfamiliar sounds and scanning their surroundings before allowing themselves to drift again. Some sleep during daylight hours when visibility makes attacks less likely, staying awake and alert through the dangerous darkness when predators, both human and environmental, become most active. Partners who trust each other take shifts, one sleeping while the other watches, trading places when fatigue becomes unbearable. Solo individuals choose sleeping positions that protect their most vulnerable areas, backs pressed against walls so no one can approach from behind, knees drawn up to protect the torso, bags clutched against the chest. The National Health Care for the Homeless Council has documented how chronic sleep deprivation among homeless populations contributes to cognitive decline, weakened immune systems, and mental health deterioration, creating a devastating cycle where the inability to sleep safely makes every other aspect of survival harder. Keep yourself clean no matter what. This rule surprises people who assume that disheveled appearance is inevitable on the streets, but experienced survivors know that hygiene is not vanity. It is a strategic necessity that determines whether you are treated as a person or a problem. A clean appearance allows someone to enter public libraries, sit in restaurant lobbies, use restroom facilities, and move through spaces without being asked to leave immediately. It reduces the risk of skin infections, respiratory illness, and parasites that can turn a manageable situation into a medical emergency. Survivors learn the locations of every free shower in their city, whether at shelters, community centers, truck stops, or public swimming pools that allow entry for a nominal fee. They know which fast food restaurants have unlocked restrooms and which gas stations will let them wash up without confrontation. Some carry travel-sized hygiene kits in their bags, assembled from samples collected at shelters or donated by outreach workers. Maintaining a clean appearance also serves as camouflage in a world that criminalizes visible poverty. The concept of hiding in plain sight, looking purposeful and put together so that no one questions your presence, is a survival technique as deliberate and practiced as any wilderness skill. Which of these rules did you already know about, and which ones surprised you? Never trust too quickly. The streets attract people in crisis, and crisis does not discriminate between the kind and the dangerous. Newcomers who bond too quickly with someone offering friendship, shelter, or protection often discover that the offer comes with costs they never anticipated. Experienced survivors maintain careful distance from strangers, observing behavior over days or weeks before extending any measure of trust. They watch how someone treats others, how they handle conflict, whether they keep their word on small things before risking anything larger. The phrase, "nobody is your friend out here," appears in nearly every first-hand account of street survival, not because genuine friendship is impossible, but because assuming it prematurely can cost you your safety, your possessions, or your life. Women on the streets face particularly acute trust dangers, with studies showing homeless women experience sexual assault at rates dramatically higher than the general population. Many adopt deliberate strategies to appear less vulnerable, wearing oversized masculine clothing, cutting hair short, avoiding eye contact, and traveling in groups whenever possible. Trust on the streets is not given. It is earned slowly, tested constantly, and withdrawn immediately when instincts signal danger. Keep moving and stay visible during the day. Remaining stationary in one public place for too long attracts attention from law enforcement, business owners, and individuals who view homeless people as problems to be displaced rather than people to be helped. Experienced survivors maintain purposeful movement through their days, walking between libraries, parks, community centers, and commercial areas on routes they know intimately. They carry themselves with intention, walking at the pace of someone going somewhere specific rather than someone with nowhere to be. This practice, sometimes called the gray man doctrine in survival communities, involves blending into the flow of pedestrian traffic so completely that no one notices you do not belong to the housed world surrounding you. Libraries become particularly critical spaces because they offer warmth, restrooms, electrical outlets for charging phones, internet access for seeking services, and an environment where sitting quietly for hours is expected rather than suspicious. The art of moving through the day without triggering confrontation, eviction, or arrest requires a knowledge of timing, geography, and human behavior that amounts to a full-time occupation. Share what you can when you can. Despite the popular image of street life as purely competitive and predatory, mutual aid is the invisible infrastructure that keeps homeless communities functioning. When someone receives a bag of food from an outreach worker, portions are divided among nearby individuals without being asked. When someone finds a warm jacket they do not need, it passes to the person shivering nearby. These exchanges happen without formal organization, driven by the understanding that fortune on the streets changes hourly. And the person you help today might be the person who saves your life tomorrow. Encampment communities like Wood Street Commons in Oakland, one of the largest unhoused camps in Northern California, formalized this principle under the motto, "From the streets, for the streets," with residents forming outreach teams and sharing food, medical supplies, and emotional support among themselves. The generosity that exists among people who have almost nothing challenges every assumption about what poverty does to the human spirit. Know your resources and protect that knowledge. Every experienced street survivor carries a mental map of their city that includes information no application or website provides. They know which churches serve hot meals on which days, which shelters have beds available on which nights, which emergency rooms will treat you without asking for insurance, and which outreach workers genuinely help versus those who merely document. This knowledge is accumulated over months and years, updated constantly as resources appear and disappear, and shared selectively with trusted individuals. Knowing where to find free dental care, where to get replacement identification documents, and where to access mental health services without a weeks-long waiting list can make the difference between climbing out of homelessness and sinking further into it. Newcomers who arrive on the streets without this knowledge are at enormous disadvantage, which is why the mentorship that develops between experienced and newer homeless individuals becomes so critical to survival. Never get involved in someone else's conflict. Intervening in disputes between other people on the streets carries risks that far outweigh any good intention behind the involvement. Altercations can involve weapons, untreated mental illness, or substance-fueled volatility that turns bystanders into victims within seconds. The rule is clear and universal. If it does not directly threaten you, you walk away. You do not make eye contact with combatants. You do not offer opinions. You do not try to mediate. You remove yourself from the area quickly and quietly because the streets punish heroes with the same indifference they punish everyone else. This detachment is not cruelty. It is the recognition that survival requires conserving your energy, your attention, and your physical safety for the threats that come directly for you, because they will come. Stay sober enough to survive. This final rule is perhaps the most difficult and the most frequently broken, but every long-term street survivor will tell you the same thing. Substance use on the streets transforms manageable danger into fatal vulnerability. Alcohol and drugs dull the reflexes that wake you when someone approaches your sleeping body. They impair the judgment that tells you which strangers to avoid and which alleys to never enter. They consume money that could buy food, socks, or a night in a shelter with a locked door. The relationship between homelessness and substance use is devastatingly complex, with addiction often being both a cause and a consequence of losing housing. But those who survive the longest on the streets maintain enough clarity to make the dozens of small decisions each day that keep them alive. Staying alert enough to read a stranger's body language. Staying sober enough to remember where you cached your extra blanket before the temperature dropped. Staying present enough to notice the weather changing, the police approaching, the person watching you from across the street with intentions that have nothing to do with kindness. Sobriety on the streets is not abstinence. It is the discipline of never losing so much awareness that you cannot protect yourself when it matters most. These 10 rules were never printed in any manual or taught in any classroom. They were learned on frozen sidewalks, in pitch-black underpasses, and in shelter lines that stretched around entire city blocks. They were passed from one person to another through whispered advice given between strangers who understood that sharing knowledge was sometimes the only currency they had left. Behind every rule is a story of someone who learned it too late, and behind every survivor is the quiet discipline of following a code that the rest of the world never needed to know existed. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the unseen world beneath the one most of us take for granted. If this changed how you think about the people you pass on the street every day, Share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another story about the resilience hiding in plain sight.